what came about from that, though, was a decision to send their actual yoga masters to the West of their choosing to be representatives for the teachings that they want to seed the West with. And so this is what now leads to the first wave of yoga. The Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world. Hello and welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda. I'm finally back with a new episode. I've taken a bit of a hiatus over the last month or so, mainly due to being overwhelmed with work and teaching yoga and recording music and kind of getting sick and having to deal with that and a head cold and chest congestion and then traveling, going to festivals. So I'm finally back and settled. And in that time, I've really thought about what this episode is going to be about. And so now we're in the third limb of the Ashtanga Yoga series. I've went through all the yamas and niyamas. If you haven't listened to them, please go back and listen to the yamas and niyamas. They are really great. But now we're focusing on asana. And I really thought about what I wanted to do for this limb. And of course, I can generalize everything like you would find in any kind of book about Ashtanga Yoga and asana and how asana translates to seat. And asana kind of means posture, but it doesn't mean posture, and so on and so forth. But I was thinking about this idea that I've had and something that I discovered in my research of yoga and my exploration of the philosophies and the history is that there are four prominent waves of yoga in regards to yoga coming out of India and into the West. And so I want to spend 4 episodes going into each wave because it's quite extensive. It covers the last 100 years or more, 200 years of information that's coming out of India and coming into Europe and going to North America. And so it's important to get a clear idea of how the yoga practice has evolved. So I don't only want to just talk about what the traditional practice looked like, but also what the modern practice looks like and why the modern practice looks the way that it does and who created it that way. And so this episode kind of acts as an introduction to that, and I'm going to go into the first wave and who were the yogis that brought yoga to the West to begin with, and then subsequently the episodes after will go into each wave and why I think that it's functioning this way. So traditionally, asana means seat. And in the original texts, first, I believe there were, 26 postures that led to 82 postures. And so when you go into Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and you go into some of the early kind of Vedanta and Vedic texts, and especially the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, you'll see that the yoga practice, the asana practice, was specifically a preparation to be able to endure sitting in a posture for a long time. And when you look at old tapestries and old drawings and old texts, is that you'll see these figures in these kind of like pretzel-like shapes, or hanging upside down from a tree, or with their feet in their stomach. Whatever it is, traditionally there were a handful of postures meant to purposely trigger the mind. And in the posture, having the mind triggered, you learn to overcome and endure whatever is happening in the body. And naturally, over time, the body starts to become accustomed to the discomfort that is coming up in the posture. And that's by far contrast to now, where, if you go to a yoga class in a studio, you're going to an hour-long class, and maybe at the end of the class, you'll be sitting in a posture for a minute or two, where traditionally, when you look at, say, a book like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and older texts, that the standard length of time that you actually would want to work up to is to be able to sit in a posture for 3 hours and 48 minutes. And 3 hours and 48 minutes was picked precisely, and I don't know exactly why, but there's something about that time, and there's something about like the numerology of it, where 3 hours and 48 minutes triggers something within your nervous system and triggers something within your physiology to release endorphins in a particular way. And so when we look at the traditional sense of asana, it is very static. It's not meant to have flow. It's not meant to be almost like poetic and sensual. And like, if you were to open Instagram right now and just search up yoga videos, you're going to be flooded with mainly women who are doing like this very kind of like sensual flow, and how they go from posture to posture is really elegant. But when you go back in time and you look at these older texts and you look at what the standard practice was back then, it was an act of endurance, and it was like an act of sitting in a posture for as long as you can and bringing up all the feelings that come up with that posture. And it's to understand something increasingly subtle. And the subtlety is what happens to the nervous system when you sit in a posture for a long enough time. And essentially, it's to lead you to sit in full lotus Padmasana for an extended period of time, and induce a very noticeable and deep meditative state. And this tradition has been kept very much the same for thousands of years until a particular point. And I believe it was to a point where the sadhus and the rishis and the swamis knew that they're on this like precipice, that if they don't open up yoga to the rest of the world and they try to keep it contained within India, that it's actually going to lose its potency, and it's not going to really have the effect that it's meant to and kind of destined to. And so in the 1700s to the 1800s, there's this period of time where, right at the point that Britain was colonizing India, there was this kind of like creaking open of the door of yoga. And in that creaking open of the door of yoga, you suddenly have this like influx of these occultists and alchemists and theologians and theosophers that are trying to make their way into India to find these like secrets that they heard whispers of, that India was holding like this old sacred ancient knowledge. And you have someone like Madame Blavatsky, who kind of initiated a lot of this, where she kind of claimed that she had this intuitive connection with these Indian masters. And I think one of them she called the Mahatmas, and I'm forgetting what the other one that she called. And that they were basically like channeling this like old yogic ancient knowledge to her, and that was basically like the premise of the books that she was writing. And this opened up the kind of like search for this ancient knowledge and this like secret yogic knowledge from others as well, like Charles Webster Leadbeater, Aleister Crowley. And it's interesting because Aleister Crowley's fourth book, the whole intro is about Ashtanga Yoga. And I read it and I was like, man, even he got caught in just glossing over stuff, and like writing it really eloquently and writing it really sophisticatedly, but it's still all such surface level stuff. And you can tell that these people are writing these books to make money. They have a whole other agenda, and they have their own goals of who they want to be and who they want to be known to be for. And when you read their books with this like kind of yogic knowledge, it rubs in a way of like, oh, you're just kind of stealing this information so that you can be impressive to like your kind of like nobility class and the people that you're trying to like rub elbows with. And so what I try to do is to kind of come from a place of a due diligence where I want to display this information as accurately as I possibly can, where I do kind of honor the traditional side of things. I do look at this kind of science modern side of things, and I marry these together so that you as a listener can be educated on what yoga is, what the asana practice is, and why it came to be the way that it is. And so when you look at that moment of time when Britain came to colonize India, and then you have this like window opening for these like people to sneak in and try to get like old texts and scrolls and try to decipher some meaning behind the practices. The thing is that these people never actually got to interact with a true yoga master, like a true rishi, a true sadhu, a true swami, because the swamis knew what was going on, and they knew that through the colonization that people were trying to come in and steal their secrets, and so they kind of hid from everybody. And what came about from that, though, was a decision to send their actual yoga masters to the West of their choosing to be representatives for the teachings that they want to seed the West with. And so this is what now leads to the first wave of yoga. The first wave of yoga came in the middle 1800s through Swami Vivekananda. And he was a student of Ramakrishna. And I'm just looking up his Wikipedia. And he came to the United States in the late 1800s. So I believe here The Parliament of the World's Religions opened on September 11th, 1893 at the Art Institute of Chicago as part of the World's Columbian Expedition. Interesting date. On this day, Vivekananda gave a brief speech representing Indian Hinduism. So, from what I remember, Swami Vivekananda was compelled to go to the West to teach about Raja Yoga. And so in my Asana kind of series here, I'm going to talk about the different yogas as well. I'm also going to do a whole different series after Ashtanga Yoga, diving into all the different yogas. But essentially, I believe you have 5 different yogas. So you have Hatha Yoga, which we all know, right? It's like the typical kind of yoga class you'll see on a schedule. But Hatha Yoga is the original oldest yoga. Like Hatha Yoga is the yoga that came from Shiva, that came from Adinath, that was taught to Matsyendranath and Gorakshanath. And so you have Hatha Yoga, you have Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. It's like its practice is singing and chanting and dancing and ceremony and ritual around Divine Mother. Then you have Kundalini Yoga, which is like newer out of these, but then it's like a focus on a lot of like energetic work, focus on a lot of breath work, a lot of like quick movement, chanting. Then you have Jnana Yoga, and Gyan means wisdom. And so Jnana Yoga is more of like study. It's more of like the utilization of yoga wisdom and the study of yoga wisdom through scripture and through experience and through deeper levels of meditation. Then you have Raja Yoga, which is the royal yoga. And that is the yoga that Swami Vivekananda brought to the West. So if you think about like all the yoga that we know of in the West, right? Vinyasa Yoga, Power Yoga, Rocket Yoga, Anusara Yoga, Katoni Yoga, like you name it. There's like so much yoga. The very first yoga that ever came to the West was Raja Yoga. And this is the yoga of consciousness. This is the yoga of understanding Brahma and Atman and Vishnu and Shiva and Krishna. And Swami Vivekananda has a book called Raja Yoga, and he goes full in depth in what Raja Yoga is. This is a book that I read like years ago. But his mission was to basically connect to the people in the Americas and the United States to connect Christianity and the belief in God and Hinduism and Raja Yoga and the belief in God, and that their view of divinity is similar to the Christian view of God, and that this was his way of like bridging the two cultures together. And I believe he only stayed in the Americas for like 6 months, but he was doing lectures to auditoriums at colleges with like 2,000 to 3,000 people in it. And he did this like nonstop for those months. And so to me, that was like the planting of the seed of yoga in America. That's like the first iteration. And he was like well-spoken, well-educated, and sophisticated, and people loved him. But he didn't really make that big of an impact. So he ended up going back to India, and he actually died quite young. He developed a disease, and he ended up dying, I believe, when he was like 36. And so, shortly after that, in I believe 1912, like 1910, 1912, 1914, it was right around World War I, you have your second Indian yoga master traveling to the West, and that is Paramahansa Yogananda. And it's with Paramahansa Yoga, or Yogananda, that the seed of yoga has now germinated and is now growing and is now showing its first flowers and first blooms. Because with Yogananda, he saw that Swami Vivekananda did his work in bringing yoga and relating the consciousness of yoga and Raja Yoga with God, but there was like something that was missed. And it's what he noticed is that the people of United States were not only believers in God, they were fervent believers in Jesus Christ. And so that was the angle that Yogananda took in connecting his teachings of Kriya Yoga and the love of Jesus Christ and the connection to Krishna that then won over the hearts of many people in the USA in the early 1900s. And so he ended up staying in the United States for 15 years, and he developed the Self-Realization Fellowship, which the very first Self-Realization Fellowship is out on the West Coast in LA, and it's like at the top of this mountain where this hotel was, and they converted the hotel into the first kind of like school, the first kind of like temple of the Self-Realization Fellowship. And I was there last year, and it's absolutely beautiful. Like the energy there is just incredible. And so now you have Yogananda planting an even more powerful seed of yoga in America. And this is still the first wave, right? And the yoga that he brings is Kriya Yoga. And this is different, but it's almost an amalgamation between Hatha Yoga and the traditional Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. And to a degree, it kind of contains them all. But Kriya Yoga, Kriya simply means cleansing. And this practice is much more about certain breath work, certain breath retention, and a lot of really powerful guided meditations and deeper meditations. And I highly recommend reading his book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, and his God Talks with Arjuna translation of the Bhagavad Gita. That book is just so incredible. Just the wisdom that he has and the way he articulates everything is incredible. Like, this man was a genius. And I could do a whole episode just on him by himself. But so the power that Yogananda had was obvious, and it came through the fact that he initiated 100,000 people into Kriya Yoga and into the Self-Realization Fellowship in his time fully in America. Because after the 15 years in the United States, he went back to India because his guru was dying, and he wanted to be there when he passed. And then when he passed, he went back to United States to live the rest of his life there. And so in this period of the first wave, what you have is an establishing of yoga in the United States. And it still didn't really have the effect enough to be something that spreads like a wildfire across the nation. And it's because it was still rooted in a religious connotation, because Yogananda was just so really connected to Jesus Christ. And even his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, wrote a book called The Holy Science, where he goes into showing this amazing connection between very, very old Vedic quotes and Vedic passages that are identical to the New Testament. And there's a little bit of a controversy there, because then it can kind of possibly indicate that information from the New Testament was ripped off. That is, it could be quite possible that there were scholars and there were philosophers way, way, way back then who somehow had access to some of the information from India. Like, maybe, I wouldn't even know, right? But he does point out, and remember, this was a book written in 1896. 1896, okay? And Sri Yukteswar is showing these passages from the Vedas and the New Testament, and they basically say the same thing in slightly different words. And so Yogananda had this kind of advantage that because Swami Vivekananda was there, he set the stage. People were super impressed, and they were like, well, maybe there's something more to this Hinduism. Maybe there's something more to these practices. And then here comes Yogananda, and he says, yes, there's so much more to these practices. There's Kriya Yoga, there's Bhakti Yoga, there's Karma Yoga. Oh, that was one that I forgot. Sorry, Karma Yoga. And there's Jnana Yoga, and so he's now setting the stage for the next wave. And that I'm going to get into in my next episode. This one, I still have like 35 minutes to try to get through some information on the top of my head here. And so in this first wave, it's not so much about asana. It's not so much about a physical practice yet. It's mainly about who you are as a person. It's about your character. It's how you carry yourself, and it's what you do as a human being. So when you're thinking about the like the yoga of consciousness and Raja Yoga and Royal Yoga, and what it means to be connected to something divine, that this divine is going to flow through you, and it's going to inform you on how you treat yourself and treat others. And Kriya Yoga are a set of practices now that is going to advance you through this connection so that you can embody that divine more than the ego of your body in the physical world. And so it's setting the stage for how the next wave comes. But even Yogananda had troubles. You know, when you read through his material, you read accounts from some of his disciples, and you know, there's one point in his book where he talks about trying to come down through the Bible Belt and trying to come down through the southern states. And because he's like Indian and he's brown and he's wearing these like seemingly like weird outfits with a turban and robes, that he immediately gets like shunned. And even though he's coming from a place of, well, you know, I love Jesus Christ too, and you know, like here's the connections that we have in India with Jesus Christ, and here's the Vedas that talk about this, they didn't want anything to do with it. They were like, absolutely not. We have the Bible, we have the Word, we have Jesus' teachings, and that's all we need. But for whatever reason, people within California, people within the East Coast, just ate it up. They loved it. Like I said, like he initiated over 100,000 people by the end of his life. And his story is really interesting because even from the accounts of his followers, they talk about these miraculous moments that would happen with him being around. And like I said, I highly recommend reading his book. It honestly changed my life in a fairly profound way. Just kind of being cracked open to the potential that through a devoted yoga practice, you can have phenomenal experiences in a profound way. And even just reading a book, it's like there's these codes in the book that go into your psychology, and as you are reading it inside your mind, it's like unlocking things within you. It's just the way that he words it, those stories that he tells, and the presence and the consciousness in how he's writing and what he's doing just gets into you in such a beautiful way. Like there are plenty of times where I'd be reading a chapter and I'd be crying just because of the emotion that's held within that chapter and within those words. And so when you look at the period of the late 1800s to the 1940s. I believe it was like late 1940s, early 1950s, when Swami Vivekananda came to the United States and left and passed away. And then Yogananda came to the United States, left, came back, and then passed away. That in that period, it basically marked this like incubation of how yoga is going to grow within the West, and how it creates a support system for the next wave that's coming that nobody knows about, right? But I do believe that in India itself, there's a network of rishis and sadhus and just enlightened yoga masters who are very in tune with the yoga in the world, and that there's a network of really powerful yogis who are responsible for basically the history and the tradition of yoga lasting through the generations. And Yogananda talks about this in his book. Sri Yukteswar talks about this in his book when he talks about the Yuga cycles and what it means to be in the Kali Yuga and the Dwapara and the Treta and the Satya Yuga. And I know I'm throwing these terms around, but we'll definitely get deeper into it in each episode. But it's important to start to understand the history of this and who initially came and why and what happened, and basically like where do you go from there. And so in that period of time from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s is you not only have the yoga that goes to the West, now you like to United States, now it's starting to seep into Europe because talk goes around there's some like weird Indian man that's in the United States, right? And in that period you also have Mahatma Gandhi, right? And so it becomes very synchronous that in this first wave of yoga that's going out to the West, that's planting seeds for it to grow in North America and the rest of Europe, that there are these like major world wars that are happening. And I do believe it is this like counterbalance of force, that if you're going to have this uprising of evil and this like termination of human life, that simultaneously you have this uprising of sacred knowledge and the uprising of human consciousness. And so it seemed like the role that Swami Vivekananda and Paramahansa Yogananda and even Mahatma Gandhi, the role that they played in this first wave was to establish an energetic balance between what was happening in Europe, so that the people in North America and other parts of Europe, in Britain and in France and Spain, that there's this like rising of human consciousness through the practice of yoga, so that when the world wars rise up and end, that the rest of the world can kind of pick up the frequency and kind of pick up the vibration and bring humanity back into a healing state. And, Yogananda does talk about this in his books, and he was like very aware that his role wasn't to try to stop the world wars, but to positively affect the people that he could in surrounding areas. And it's in contrast to Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi was the opposite way. He was like, how do I stop these wars? And he even wrote a letter to Hitler to try to stop him and prevent him from invading countries. And the story of Gandhi is really interesting as well, because we know him as this like liberator of India, and that he was largely responsible for the nonviolent uprising that basically convinced Britain to stop colonizing India and to leave, because they're up against a force that they didn't really expect. And it was a force of people who just like laid down any will to fight, but were just rising up silently and non-violently. And, it really goes and plays into his austerity in ahimsa and non-harm. And so there is this synchronicity that when you have this wave that's coming up and it's about to come back down, and it's going to prepare for the next wave, is that it starts with Swami Vivekananda, it continues with Yogananda, it goes into Gandhi, that then leads to the liberation of India. And so the synchronicity is that the sadhus and the rishis and the swamis, they knew yoga had to come out. Yoga had to go out into the West. It couldn't be contained in India anymore. And if they were to let go of their control of the yogic knowledge, and they allowed these like advocates to go out and to teach people about the yoga practice, that it could do something fundamental for India itself. And then so we see the synchronicity that allowing yoga to go out caused a rebound of karma to end the occupation and the colonization of India. And that's just like what I put together in this. I mean, if you were to go and talk to scholars, they're probably not going to agree with me, but that's what it seems like it makes sense to me as a yogi and someone who has studied the history and studied in depth all of these yogis. Like, I studied Gandhi in a 400 level university class, like one of the higher levels of a university class. And with that allowed me to study Swami Vivekananda and Yogananda. And so it starts to make sense that these ways of yoga are a response to the forces that want to bring humanity down. And so you need something that's going to bring humanity up. And it seems like what they kind of uncovered is that the Abrahamic religions are covertly there to bring humans down. And that's why you see that throughout history, wars were started through these religions. And that's the interesting thing about yoga, is that no war has been started with yoga. Let me say that again. No war, not a single one, not a single battle has ever been used under the manipulation of yoga. So you don't have some Maharaj in India who has some like yogic secret and is like, okay, we're going to use this to convince all these people to join my army. And we're just going to say, like, by the grace of God, you're going to kill all these people. And the only exception to this that I know, some of you might pick up on is the story of the Bhagavad Gita. But in the story of the Bhagavad Gita, there's already a battle about to go on between two families. So it's one family and two different sides of it. And one side of it wants more land and wants to take over the kingdom of the other part of the family. And so Krishna comes in and goes, hey, I'll give either of you the opportunity to have me as a counselor to counsel you on this battle. And the bigger family is like, we don't need you. I have, thousands of soldiers. There's hundreds of us in the family, and we're going to win. And so Krishna goes, okay, well, I'm going to go with Arjuna and his family and his 12 brothers, and then unveils his true nature and that he is like the embodiment of yoga. And so then Arjuna gets the guidance and the tutelage from Krishna in how to win the battle through understanding his place in life, and to understand karma yoga, to understand bhakti yoga, to understand that unity means unifying yourself in the deed and the dharma that you're in. And so when you look at Swami Vivekananda, his dharma bestowed upon him by his teacher Ramakrishna was to go to the West and start the wave. Then you have Yogananda, and the dharma of Yogananda was to go to the West and now carry the wave and to rise the wave. Then you have Mahatma Gandhi, who then rides that wave to then liberate India. And then you have this wave crashing down, you have the end of the wars, and you have the moving towards the second wave, which now includes a whole new set of yogis and a whole new introduction of a new kind of yoga. So in this first wave, asana still represents seat. So asana is still in its traditional sense. And when you look at the 80 traditional postures, a lot of them are seated postures. Some of them are standing postures, but for the most part, they are seated postures with variations. And I've posted this book before, but a great book to get into that you can get for free online. I can even share the PDF in the description. And that is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika is like the Bible of yogis. And it's not that it has some allegorical stories of God and creations, myths, and all this stuff. It's like how to do all the asana postures, how to do all the breath work, how to do the mudras, what the different chakras are, and what all the kumbhakas are, and the locks, and the meditations. And it's just so in depth of, how to even approach exploring samadhi and enlightenment. And so if you want to get a good representation of what all the original postures are, Hatha Yoga Pradipika is the go-to. And again, I'll put that in the description so that you can check that out. If you want to support a good place, a good yoga school, you can order the book from the Bihar School of Yoga, and that's Shivananda's. So Shivananda is also an important figure in the first wave of yoga, but primarily in India. He was basically one of the first people to systematize the yoga practice in a very succinct way. So when you go to the a Shivananda ashram, there's a set of asanas that have not changed. So from the onset of the Shivananda school, from when he created it to now, nothing has changed. And when I talk to my teacher about it, it kind of annoys him, because he's like, yeah, you want to upgrade things. He's like, when my teacher Vishwaji created Ashtanga Yoga, he's like, yeah, if Ashtanga Yoga stayed the way that it was when I created it 20 years ago, I wouldn't be where I am now. He's like, you want to freshen things up. You want to create new sequences. You want to add new information. You want to fine tune things. You want to take things out. He's like, it's admirable to create a practice and be like, okay, this is the practice, but to keep it the way that it is invites stagnancy. And Shivananda isn't one of the teachers that I really dived into. For whatever reason, Paramahansa Yogananda is just to me, the goat of enlightened or yoga masters. And I have a really strong affinity to his whole lineage of gurus. And yeah, I think I'm at the point of kind of wrapping this up. to speak a little bit more on asana. And so when you go to a studio now, right, you see names on a schedule, you see power yoga, you see yin yoga, you see yin yang flow yoga, you see rocket yoga, you see Ashtanga Yoga series, primary series, secondary series, you'll see hatha yoga, you'll see all kinds of yoga. And for the most part, in a typical studio, those are just labels. You go into the studio and you take the class. You're taking the class from someone that's probably only done a 200 hour. Maybe they've done their whole 500 hour. But for the most part, you're taking a class from someone that's been teaching for 2 to 3 years or 4 years, which is totally fine. I was at that point. I did my 200 hour. I started teaching right away. And I was teaching yoga from my 200 hour for 4 years before I went and got my next 300 hour to complete my 500 hour. And, in that time, I was doing some other training. So it took about 10 years to get to the point where I have over 1,000 hours of trainings. But there's this thing that happens in the modern world of yoga that when you go to a studio, there's a kind of like cut and paste of what a yoga class should look like. And it's typically like you start on your back, you start seated, you do some warm-ups, you come up to your feet, you do some warrior postures, you do some vinyasa, then you do your peak posture, then you come down to the floor, you do the seated practice, and you lay on your back, and then it's done. And the design of a class, traditionally speaking, is put together in a particular way. And so if you were to compare a monk sitting in a cave doing his practice to a student now sitting in a studio doing their practice, they're going to look wildly different. The monk that's sitting in a cave is going to be sitting in one posture, chanting and breathing. And that's going to be that monk's practice all day. So just imagine, say if you picked like a seated twist, right? So just totally normal. You're bringing your left knee onto the ground. Your left foot comes to the right of your hip. You cross your right foot beside your left knee. You wrap your left arm around your knee. You twist. You bring your hand back behind you. Now imagine sitting in that posture for like 4 hours straight. And you're seated in that posture and you're chanting and you're breathing. And you're just chanting and breathing nonstop. And you have some kind of mantra, like say you have, like yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means unifying the fluctuations of the mind with the original state of consciousness. And you're just chanting over and over and over and over and over again in your mind. And you're doing this breath work. You're doing strong inhales, strong exhales. You're doing like gentle inhales and gentle exhales, and for hours and hours and hours. That's what a traditional like asana practice would look like. And then he'd come out of it, do it on the other side, sit in that posture for hours and chanting and breathing, seated for hours and hours. Fast forward to now. You go to a yoga class and it's movement nonstop. And it's seated warm-ups, it's cat-cow, it's lifting one arm and lifting one leg and bringing your elbow and your knee into your core, and then it's downward dog, then it's plank, then it's breaths in plank, then it's down dog, then it's a lunge, then, it's like nonstop from one to the next and one to the next and one to the next. And the criticism of this kind of class is it's not going to take you where being seated in one posture and breathing and chanting is going to take you. But conversely, being seated in one posture, chanting and breathing isn't going to take you where being in fluid movement is going to take you. So each has their own benefits. And I feel like it's my job to take a look at these and instead of compare them against each other and say the traditional way is the only way, or to say the modern way is the only way, it's to look at both of them and say, okay, what are the benefits of them both? And how do I bring those elements into my practice? And so if I have been brought up to do a really strong flow practice and it feels really good for me to do that and I feel my body opening up, that I believe is due to the evolution of the practice that has gone to this point where our bodies, this body right now, doesn't need to sit in a posture for 4 hours to get it. That yoga has evolved to this point where now I can do a flow practice and get into a state of consciousness that when I go to sit and meditate, it's as if I sat for 4 hours chanting and breathing. And I'll get more into that as we go along. And I think it's just important to kind of develop a state of mind where you can be critical and accepting of nuance. And so in my mind, I look at the past and I'm like, okay, my critical thinking on this is that a lot of that stuff is outdated. And when I look now, when I look at it critically, a lot of the stuff is watered down. And so how do I look back at the past that could be outdated and see that there is wisdom in the original teachings, and come back now and see there is wisdom in the refinement of the practice? And that's where they come together, and you can develop a practice that is best of both worlds, and that is Ashtanga Yoga. That I truly feel is what my teacher has done, is that he said, okay, I'm mainly attracting Westerners, and for whatever reason, the Western mind and the Western body needs movement, but it also needs to be able to sit still. So I'm not only going to design the class to have that kind of bell-shaped curve where we start seated, we do some breath work, we move our way up, but when we move our way up, we're going to hold postures for longer. We're going to sit in the postures. We're going to stand in the postures. We're going to be with the postures. Then we're going to go from one to the next. We're going to do a little bit of vinyasa. We're going to do sun salutations. And we're going to lead to the point where when we come to the seated part of the class at the end, it's in us to sit in a posture for a little bit longer and to focus and breathe and to prepare ourselves for Shavasana and meditation. So we've explored the first wave. We've looked at Swami Vivekananda and his work with bringing Raja Yoga and the teachings of consciousness and the teachings of Hinduism. We've looked at Paramahansa Yogananda and him bringing Kriya Yoga, him bringing the connection with Jesus Christ, and teaching the more authentic way to understand your connection to God and connection of consciousness, and how that leads to Mahatma Gandhi using ahimsa and satyagraha, which is an important thing. So in the yamas, there's something called aparigraha, where aparigraha is like non-grasping. But satyagraha, satya is truth, and satya is also a yama, and satyagraha is incessant truth. And so Gandhi brought into the minds of Indians non-harm and incessant truth. So the incessant truth of non-harm. And an example of this is Gandhi noticed that the British guards were making these like group of Indians need some kind of like identification in order to pass through this certain area. And Gandhi was like, these people have never had this kind of identification ever. Like, what are you doing? And so when these Indian people were like, well, I need to like, this is my route. I need to go to these other provinces and do these things. And if they weren't cooperating, the Indian or the British would like beat them. And some of them have beat them to death because they would fight back. And then that would give the justification to do greater harm. And so the Indian people would be beaten to death. And then the other villagers would be scared. And so Gandhi went up and they're like, you need to show this like particular identification. Gandhi's like, well, I don't have it. Right. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to go. And he uses ahimsa and satyagraha in kind of a brilliant way, but also kind of dumb as well. Like if it was you, like you probably wouldn't want to do this, but he lets the British soldier beat him, but he just lays there on the ground. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't do anything. And there's a moment where he's looking into the eyes of the soldier while the soldier is beating him. And the soldier stops and immediately recognizes what he's doing and has a moment of clarity and like backs off. And Gandhi looks to the villagers and says, see, if you just don't fight them back, let them beat you, they see the humanity within you. And they see the wrong that they're doing and they'll stop. And so all the villagers come up and they just like flood the area to try to like make their way through. And then all these other soldiers are like beating the Indians and the Indians just let them beat them. And it gets to the point where it works. And the soldiers are like, what are we even doing here? And it just cracks their consciousness because of the programming that they were given to play the role of the authority. And if they can no longer enact their authority because the person that they're pressing the authority onto is completely submissive, it just evaporates their power. And the guards just, or the soldiers just stand down and they're like, yeah, you're right. This is so dumb. Because what is it going to lead to? Us killing you? And then we're going to be put on trial because there's all these witnesses that you guys didn't even do anything. And then we're just going to kill you. That's not right. And so that was like a pivotal moment in Gandhi's like career of things that like gave him the edge to be like, okay, yeah, ahimsa and satyagraha are the elements of this movement. And so if we parade through the streets, if we protest through the streets and we're silent, we're non-violent, and we just let them beat us, but we don't fight back and we get up and we keep moving, we're going to win this. And that's essentially what won it for him. And so it's interesting to see the yamas in action and how powerful they really are. And, you know, it's something that Yogananda talks about too in his Bhagavad Gita translation of, you know, and the neat thing and another synchronicity is that Paramahansa and Yogananda and Gandhi were friends. There's actually like a page or there's like a whole chapter in his autobiography where he talks about Gandhi and meeting Gandhi and sitting with him and you know, helping him with his whole movement and stuff. And so you can see in this first wave that it took a lot of courage, it took a lot of work, it took a lot of dedication from these three individuals to basically travel to the United States, travel through India, and spreading this message that it is time to spread yoga. It is time to unify, and it's time to face our oppressors and time to face the authority with loving kindness, with compassion and non-harm and incessive truthfulness, that it breaks the spell that the authority has, right? And think about everything that's going on in the world right now. Think about what's going on in the United States. Like, there's some crazy shit happening in the world. And so if there's some kind of lesson that we can take from this, is in the face of evil, you don't fight evil with evil. You have to face it with the incisive truth that evil itself can only be subdued with loving kindness and compassion, even if that evil, in all of its desperation, lashes out. Look what happened in the United States. I'm not even going to say any of the names. I'm not even going to say anything. Just look what happened in the United States recently. In the face of evil, evil struck out. And now, what is the result? What is going to happen? And it all comes down to, I believe, these waves of yoga. We're going to see something very powerful happening in the next, few years, at least. And it's all going to lead up to what I believe is the fourth wave. And we're not just there yet. We have a few episodes to go. And so in those few episodes, it's going to be like a whole month that goes by. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen. And, if I were to say anything now, what my prediction is that we're going to see a really potent unraveling. And just think of that word, unraveling. So when you're on social media and you're scrolling and you're listening to the news and you're listening to podcasts and you're listening to interviews and you're seeing all of it unravel and unfold, you're going to see underlining currents of influence. And then that's where you want to look. You want to look at the underlining current of influence. There's going to be the people talking. There's going to be the people saying all the things. They're going to be convincing you of this opinion and that opinion. They're going to want you to believe in this politically and that politically. And it's just up to you to look at that underlining current of influence. And where is that coming from? And how do you subdue it within you and within others? And that we can take the lessons of the past and we can say, oh, non-violent, insistent truth is the answer to this. And so what does that look like to you? So that wraps up part 1 of my Asana series. In the next one, I'm going to go into the second wave and who were the yoga masters that brought on the second wave. And that is what starts. It's the second wave that starts what modern yoga is right now and what is quote unquote called Western yoga. And I'm going to go on a whole rant about that because Western yoga is not a thing. And you'll hear more about it in the next episode. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, your night. Check the links in the description. Follow my pages. I have a yoga page, Yogi Zorananda. That's basically me showing just specifically yoga posture stuff and breathing techniques and some videos on ideas that I have about what yoga is and stuff. But please go ahead and follow my Instagram page, Yogi Zorananda. I also have a music page, Zorananda Music. I'll have links to my music and my website. And again, I'm not trying to sell anything. I don't have yoga courses. I don't have any of that stuff. I'm doing this basically for free. I just want you to have this information. And my real only desire is for discourse. So to go onto my yoga page on Instagram, to email me, to message me, ask me questions. And you're welcome to reach out, whoever you are, whoever's listening, to go onto my website, zorananda.com, which is primarily my music, but you can still email me and you can still reach out and ask me questions. The best place to get a hold of me is on my Instagram page, Yogi Zorananda. There you can directly message me. But if you are a private account and you message me, it's not going to come through to me. So you're going to have to follow me, and I would have to approve that, and then you'd be able to message me. So if that's the case, just email me. Go to my website, zorananda.com, go to contact, and be like, hey, bro, I listened to your podcast. I have a ton of questions. What do you think about this and that? I'll be happy to answer any questions because I'm still small fries over here. I don't have, thousands of people messaging me, so it'll be a lot easier for me to get to your messages. It'll just come right through to my email, and I can get to it right then and there. So, again, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, of your night, of your week. Enjoy.